format. These surveys contain varying tools. If I restrict myself first to the household care survey, these contain 3 tools. The first one and the main one was the main women's questionnaire. Then we had a men's questionnaire as well as a children's questionnaire. As I mentioned, the main questionnaire or the main tool was for women, and it contained 10 sections relating from household assets, income, time allocation, norms and perceptions, to decision making, infrastructure, and well-being. The men's questionnaire contained 2 sections, mainly on time allocation and norms and perceptions. Finally, the children's questionnaire contained only 1 section on time allocation. It was based on a stratified sampling procedure, and the data was collected between May and June of 2017, and it covered in total a number of around 1,200 households. On the other hand, the rapid care analysis was 1 tool with 8 exercises, where, as I mentioned, it was based on a workshop format, and the people involved or invited were supposed to respond to or reflect on who cared for whom within the household, the total volume of work, the distribution of care roles, key social norms, fluctuations and changes in providing care, as well as options necessary to address problems relating to care. Again, this was also collected in May 2017. I'll now straight move on to the actual results from these 2 surveys. Yes. There are 2, the presentation of results will focus on 2 main issues. That's the gender participation in care as well as other emerging issues. With regard to the gender participation, there is a time use between women and men, between boys and girls, as well as the household division of childcare. Then perception on child care and the division of domestic care, as well as criticism and violence in performing household activities. With regard to other emerging issues, we look at time and labor-saving equipment available within the household, as well as external support, infrastructure, and well-being. The gender participation in care mainly focuses on 5 issues: time use between women and men, time use between boys and girls, as perceptions on care, as well as household decision making. First, we look at time use between women and men. This particular table shows the main or headline activities that women and men are involved in, and it's segregated between rural and urban areas, with the last 2 columns showing the combined total of rural and urban areas. From the rapid care analysis, it shows that it's estimated that women spend around 94 hours, while men spend 106 hours weekly on non-work activities. That's personal care, sleeping, and entertainment. Then when it comes to, in terms of the allocation in percentages, as you see, men spend a lot of time on, especially in rural areas, on leisure. But on the other hand, when it comes to paid work, they also spend far much time compared to women. The divergence between women and men is highest with regard to paid work, is highest in urban areas compared to rural areas. When it comes to unpaid care work, the ratio of share of time allocated to unpaid work between women and men is in most cases 6 times in rural areas, in both rural and urban areas. So on average, women spend in a multiple of 6 times more on care work compared to men. The next slide shows where do these divergences come in. And this particular slide looks at patterns on paid work. at what time or at what time in a day does the divergence between women and men. The upper line is for the men, and the dotted one is for the women. As I mentioned earlier, women spend considerably much less time on paid work compared to men, but the divergences, as you'd expect, happen mostly during the day, and then they even out or at the end of the day at around in the evening. So it's estimated that on average women spend 21 hours working, while men spend more than twice of this time, 44 hours per week, on paid work. Next slide, please. When it comes to the pattern, the previous chart was for paid work. Now this is for the unpaid work, and this is where the divergences are greatest. Again, the dotted line represents female time allocation, and the bold line is for men. As you can see, the bold line is more or less stable with the allocation or towards paid work, and this is on an hourly basis, more or less at less than 10% for men. Whereas for women, immediately after 6 a.m., it increases to close to 35% and remains at that rate for up to 7 p.m. at the end of the day. So this is a very big divergency, and hence a key source of concern for all Ugandans. Next slide, please. Next, we move to children's time use. As I mentioned, there were 3 modules within these surveys, one for women, one for men, as well as another one for children. And this particular chart shows the average time spent on each activity by the gender of the child, and this is between boys and girls. On average, boys spend more time working on family businesses, especially in the rural areas, and girls spend more time on unpaid care as well as domestic work. The family business is the second last row as shown on the chart, whereas the one for the unpaid work can be captured by issues such as meal preparation, collection of water, and cleaning the houses. So on average, boys spend more if they are involved in work on family businesses, whereas for girls it's on unpaid care work. Next. This chart looks at the time spent, but tries to do the previous chart's disaggregation by the 3 districts of focus in our study. That's Kampala, Kabale, and Kabong. It is worth noting that spending on work for family businesses is far much more prevalent in Kabong compared to either Kampala or Kabale, whereas in Kampala most of the children are studying at home, and again here there are quite large divergences on what people are doing. So this partly shows that in different districts of Uganda, children as well as their adults are quite doing committing time to different activities. Some are working on family businesses, others are heavily involved in issues such as collection of fuel and collection of water, as well as cleaning the households. Next slide, please. This particular chart shows that the average time spent on each activity by the age group. As was mentioned, children were segregated between those that are aged 13 to 17 years, and then the more younger category of 8 to 12 years. First, it's worth noting that there are only minimal divergences between these various age groups. It's mainly with regard to work for family businesses, and this would be partly expected given the fact that those who are 8 to 12 years do not have the kind of physical ability to undertake this kind of work. But also worth noting that only a small proportion of time is spent at school. Next, we move to the household division of child care. This particular chart looks at persons who are involved in caring for children less than 18 years in the past 24 hours by the end of the location. I wish to read some of the quotes that we received from this rapid care analysis before I go to the chart, where they say caring for children is a motherly task. This entails ensuring that children eat, get health care, are escorted to school, are clean, learn good morals, and live in a hygienic environment. Participants in Kabale and Kampala say that teaching children their culture and language is a mother's responsibility, since they spend more time with them or with her. There was also an assumption that women who bear children are naturally inclined to caring for them, and one man mentioned women are naturally gifted to care for children and have more patience and love for them. They are better than fathers. All these tasks are hidden under caring for children are expected to be performed by women. This particular table looks at both the urban and rural areas, and it's indicated that the amount of time women spend on childcare is far much higher, especially in the urban areas, compared to their rural counterparts. As was mentioned by those quotes, there is some social norms are inclined to this, where there is an expectation that women have more patience and with regard to caring for children. Next slide, please. This particular chart looks at the gender patterns over a duration of time spent again on looking after children aged less than 18 years in a given day. Again, the dotted line is for women, and it's in most cases it's above the line for men, which is the bold line, and it remains above that until the time around 9 p.m. in the day, when these two lines kind of meet but never intersect or cross each other. So generally, women spend far much more time on childcare in a given day compared to their male counterparts. The study was able, next slide please, was able to also look at what determines these kinds of household decision making with regard to childcare. For women, those who are in the older age category are more likely to be involved in childcare, and partly because the expectation some of them are retired, as well as those who earn higher incomes are also more likely to be involved in childcare. The probability of childcare increases with the education levels, those involved in monogamous marriages, those in small household sizes, and as well as if the child or children in question are aged 2 years and below, but this is most prevalent in Kampala. When it comes to men, it's mainly middle-aged men that are likely to be involved in childcare, men with some higher level of education attainment, but also we find that in some cases even men without education are also involved in childcare. Next, we look at the gender perceptions on childcare. And in this case, both women and men were asked what are the most problematic activities, and this particular chart looks for the activities for women. And we do this for Kabong, Kabale, and Kampala. It's worth noting that the two most frequently cited problem activities in Kabong is water collection and secondly caring for children. On the other hand, in Kabale it is fuel collection followed by caring for children. For Kampala, it is washing clothes that is much is considered the most problematic activity, followed by caring for children. It's worth noting how caring for children is the second most frequently cited reason of problematic activity for women across all these districts. Next, we contrast this with what do men consider to be their most problematic activity. Again, in Kabong, the most, here there is a reversal in terms of proportions. For men, it is caring for children with a proportion of around 34%, followed by collecting water at 28%. When it comes to Kabale, again, caring for children is the most frequently cited problematic activity, followed by meal preparations. I don't know why men in Kabale are more involved in meal preparations than they are. Then when it comes to Kampala, washing clothes is the more, again, remains the most predominant problematic activity for men, followed by caring for children. So this goes to show you how that in the first instance, it was, for women, it was a combination of water collection as well as caring for children, whereas for men, it's predominantly caring for children that's considered a problematic activity, followed to a certain extent by washing clothes in Kampala. This partly goes to show some of the, partly explain some of the results we showed earlier. If men consider caring for children a problematic activity, they are more likely to relegate this to their female counterparts. These particular two slides look at the division of household, domestic or childcare work. The first one is for women, and it specifically relates to responses to what kind of help would you need. It's worth again noting, this is heavily correlated with the previous slides. Women are more likely to cite requiring help with regard to caring for children, followed by collection of water. On the other hand, when it comes to issues regarding men, there is quite some variation, especially with regard to Kampala compared to Kabale and Kabong. For men, it's the caring for children that's most, the most preferred help would be sought in that area, followed to a certain extent, even in both Kabale, I beg your pardon, in both Kabale and Kabong, caring for children is the most cited activity men would require help, followed by, even in Kampala, it's caring for children. However, there are significant variations in the preferred help across the three districts. There was also a question in the survey how often women ask for help and if it was ever granted by their partner. And in this particular slide, we show the results for these two questions. The first one, in the last month, how often have you asked for your partner to help you with tasks? There are differences. The most women in Kampala indicate that 2 out of every 3 women indicate that they have asked their partner for help, compared to only 55% in Kabong and only 40% at the lowest in Kabale. The second question, when you asked how often has your partner helped you with the task, there are no major differences in Kampala, whereas in Kabong it's indicated that 46% never received the help, whereas another 49% sometimes when asked they did receive help. When it comes to Kabale, 58% indicate sometimes they receive help, whereas also around 40% indicate they always receive help when they receive it. The other issues relate to critical decision regarding within the household. So there are questions on critical decisions as well as the basic decisions. Men majorly make decisions on children's schooling, especially in Kabong and Kabale, as well as the purchase of large household assets, except in Kampala where it's mainly a joint activity. Just to note, this is regarding the decision, but it does not necessarily mean the expenditure. Women make decisions on how many children to have, except in Kabong, and also women make decisions on own health. Issues regarding whether to take out a loan are mainly made jointly. So that's for the critical decisions. When it comes to the basic decisions, such as making small daily purchases, whether to visit relatives, how much time is spent mainly on their activities, these were mainly made by women, but however, with consultation with their partners. On the other hand, 65% of women on average are unable to influence their other partner's decision-making process, whereas this is much lower for Kampala at 50%. Next, we move to criticism and violence in performing household activities. It is worth noting that cultural norms in Kabong do not condone violence or no criticism against women, even among women themselves. The first issue we look at is for acceptability of violence against women. Around 17% of women, generally more than 14% for all women we considered or surveyed, said it was acceptable to beat or commit violence on a woman for the following reasons: if she failed to take care of their children. Remember the previous slides that showed this is considered a very problematic activity. The other activities, she left the house without asking permission, or if she disobeyed her husband, uncle, father, brother, more or less general, all males. Overall, 45% of women and around 35% of men in Kabong said it was acceptable to beat a woman. Next is acceptability of criticism against women. Especially in Kabong and Kabale, it was felt that it was acceptable to yell, criticize a woman almost in all situations that were availed to the respondents. In some, domestic violence against women, especially in Kabong and Kabale, is a norm or behavior that is fully accepted or expected by both women and men if the woman failed to meet her domestic or care work burdens. This particular table or chart looks at the knowledge of criticism, violence, as well as mockery in society and how it differs among the three districts. The first one relates to knowledge of beating a woman, then knowledge of shaming a man, knowledge of harshly criticizing a woman. And we see those rates, they vary quite significantly, especially in Kabong and Kabale, compared to the district of Kampala. But also in the next chart or side of the chart, it shows that these kinds of issues are most prevalent in urban compared to rural areas. On the other hand, when it comes to knowledge about criticism, violence, and mockery in society by men, the issues are more pronounced in Kabale compared to Kabong or Kampala. Thank you very much. But also for men, the issues are more pronounced among men in rural areas. It's in these places that it's in rural areas that men find it acceptable to harshly criticize a woman or to find it acceptable to beat a woman or to shame a man. The next slide looks at other emerging issues. In this particular slide, we look at issues regarding paid-for time-saving activities and how these differ between rural and urban areas. And we find how many of the women and men are paid for these following activities, which in some instances can amount to unpaid activities, or in other instances they can be paid for. So most of the pay is received, especially in Kabong, for grinding. When it comes to issues in Kabale, women and men are more likely to be paid if they are cutting a child's hair or braiding her hair. And the same applies for issues regarding, I think the same proportion is much higher in Kampala. When it comes to rural and urban residencies, most of the activities, especially cleaning, transporting food, cooking, grinding, are unpaid for. It's mainly, again, hair braiding or cutting of hair, as well as, in some cases, daycare activities that are paid for. Next slide, please. We also try to investigate what kind of infrastructure is available, equipment that could ease the burden of care work within households. The table shows the kinds of equipment that are available. The most prevalent equipment is the firewood or charcoal efficient stove. At least 1 out of every 2 households in Kabong has this kind of equipment, whereas in Kampala it's more or less the most dominant asset held. The other activity that can help save time that's available in households in Kabale, it's either a tap or a water harvester, whereas this is nearly absent in Kabong. When it comes to between rural and urban areas, it's mainly in urban areas an electric pump as well as a charcoal efficient stove that are the most prevalent. Far few households have issues regarding refrigerators, generators, solar systems, as well as water harvesters, especially in rural areas. This particular table looks at the availability of selected products and services within the household. The first indicator we capture is, are there children aged 2 years or below living within the household? And across all households, at least 1 out of every 3 households has a child aged less than 2 years. Then, do you have a mosquito net? This is far much more prevalent across all the districts. Do you have nappies in your household? This is less unlikely in Kabong and more prevalent in Kampala and Kabale with around 66%. Are there adults who have some form of disability, especially regarding being blind or cannot walk, living within the household? They are more in Kabong compared to the other 2 districts. And do you have walking sticks, crutches, and a wheelchair within the household? If yes, in the above questions. And for both Kabale and Kabong, the rate is around 70%. When it comes between rural and urban areas, the rates regarding residency of children below less than 2 years is more or less the same. The same applies to issues regarding mosquito nets. Nappies are more available in urban compared to twice more likely to be available in urban than in rural areas, whereas wheelchairs are more available among rural residents. As we come to the end, we also had questions on what kind of support do you receive from either public services, NGOs or CSOs, as well as community or the district. We were looking for public services such as if you have access to an improved water source, and who provides this, or do you have access to a health facility, electricity, and the like. Most of the households have access to an improved water source. The list is in Kabale at 71%, and this again is mainly predominantly provided by government. The same applies, access to health services is nearly universal at more than 91% at the list, and again provided by government. Electricity is very rare in Kabong, less than 2% compared to either Kabale and Kampala. And the final question relates to use of childcare facilities, and again, this is most prevalent in Kabong, less likely in Kabale, and to somewhat less likely at around 18% for Kampala. And I think this might be partly related to the fact that for children or households who use these kinds of facilities in Karamoja, they might come with food rations to eat. Finally, the average time taken to reach selected places, and again, this adds to the burden of childcare work in all these places. When it comes to collecting firewood, most of the time is spent, or the largest amount of time in minutes is spent in Kabale. Going to the marketplace, again, it's in Kabale where people spend more time, as well as accessing all season roads. Again, it's most difficult in Kabale. So Kabale appears to be a place that's heavily, given its terrain, to be influenced by the unavailability or lack of infrastructure. In conclusion, what do we recommend given all these statistics we found from these 3 districts? As was mentioned, the survey covered only 3 districts, but it remains representative of what is happening across Uganda. One of the issues that we recommend is investing in sectors such as education and agricultural services, because we've seen that households where people earn more, both the husbands are more likely to, in households where they earn more, they are more likely to be involved in childcare, especially those with higher education attainment compared to those with no education attainment. There is also a requirement by the Ministry of Gender, Labor and Social Development to work with other stakeholders to streamline the SDG 5, especially that relates to childcare work, raise its awareness that this is a key issue, and for all stakeholders to be able to engage on this particular issue. There is also a requirement to invest in affordable technology. As was mentioned, there is quite a lot of demand for energy-saving stoves, gas cookers, even solar energy that can help in easing the time burden for food preparations, as well as availing childcare facilities that could reduce childcare tremendously, as was proclaimed in the ECD policy. At the national level, there is a requirement to more accurately value the amount of women unpaid care work, especially in national statistics. That's not currently happening, but should be happening given the fact that this is now a recognized item under the SDGs. And finally, for the national body, the one that relates to the Human Rights Commission, to raise awareness about issues regarding unpaid work as a violation of the rights of women. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Honorable Minister and Honorable Members of Parliament, what you have been listening to was the presentation of research findings on gender roles and the care economy in Ugandan households, the case of Kabong, Kabale, and Kampala districts by Dr. Kasirye Ibrahim. Give him another round of applause. And I seem to have heard him say that it is acceptable in some cases for these people who are tired, who are toiling, who are tilling the land, to also be terrorized and disdolerated. How can that be possible, and why? Perhaps as we continue to discuss, and we're going to have a panel discussion, we'll dig deep into these issues and also come up with some recommendations on what needs to be done. So at this point, allow me to invite my co-moderator, who is Alice Maria, who is going to call the panelists, and then she will be able to drive this, and also a plenary discussion or a debate after the panel presentations. Maria, please.
Thank you very much, Patrick. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Yes, thank you so much for making time to discuss a very pertinent issue. These conversations usually put me in a space where I'm really excited that we're talking about this, but also the year is 2018 and we're still talking about these things. It can be quite heartbreaking, especially noting that these are things that we engage with every day. So quickly, I'll get straight to the point. I'm going to invite my panelists who are going to take us through what people in different sectors are currently doing to address the 3 R's when it comes to unpaid care work. The 3 R's are recognizing, reducing, and redistributing care work. At this juncture, I would like to introduce and also welcome my panelists who will be seated at that table. First on our panel is Mr. Juma Waira, a Senior Education Officer from the Equal Opportunities Commission. Let's clap for him as he comes up.
I also have Mrs. Margaret Kakande, the Head of Budget Monitoring and Accountability Unit at the Ministry of Finance Planning and Economic Development. We have Mr. John Bosco Chintukavuma, the Resident Consultant on Strategic Planning at the National Planning Authority. We have Mr. Jimmy Amone, the District Speaker for Lamour District. And finally, Ms. Harriet Gimbo Robina, Director for Programs at Action Aid Uganda. Please sit wherever it makes you comfortable.
Thank you very much. I'm going to start with Mr. Jimmy Amone. We've heard so many things about unpaid care work at this meeting today. The presentation was very elaborative. I would like to agree that washing clothes is very labor intensive and time consuming, and anyone who does that will agree with me as well. Mr. Jimmy Amone, what are you doing practically in Lamour District to address this challenge of unpaid care work? Before you answer that question, do the people of Lamour District recognize that unpaid care work is a problem?
Thank you very much. Protocol observed. To go straight away to that question, here to represent myself as a person who cares. And in addition, I'm also here to represent the general community, in particular of Lamour District. With my experience in the community, it is true that a section of the community do recognize that there's unfairness
in care. But a greater percentage seem not to realize this. Given the different factors in a community where I come from, you know, in northern Uganda, Lamoille is in northern Uganda, we have been experiencing the civil war for almost 20 years, and that has destroyed a lot. Amongst others is culture. But for us as leaders, we do recognize that, and we know it will take us a long period of time to get our people back on track. And I must thank, in 2016 when I joined leadership, I came and found this organization called UWONET in conjunction with UWONET, who were implementing and helping our people to realize the unfairness, the suffering that women go through, in addition to the suffering that was brought about by war. So it is true that a great section of the community seem not to realize the unfairness, because each and every day, personally, I receive calls from mainly women expressing how they are being mistreated by, more especially men, gender-based violence. And we try to address such issues by dialogues. But it's not easy, because the culture of our people is that men are always above there. And that one, we all know it. It is not easy. But it's unless we have such programs that are brought in the communities to continuously expose our people to understand that a woman, for example, a woman is not just a human being like a man. She also deserves to sleep. She needs to have treatment. She needs also to educate herself, to have knowledge. It is not always about the man. In addition to the aggressive economy, the economy is so aggressive that not only a man can bring bread at the end of the day. It is a collective responsibility of both men and women. And therefore, if you have this community where the men don't seem to understand that, and yet also again in our community, almost 70% of the daily work at home is done by women. Taking children to school, preparing what they should eat, going to the garden. Men are falling back. And this one, I don't know, maybe because of the effects of war. So these are things that we need to continuously engage our community so that they understand what is happening.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jimmy. I'm going to come to you, Ms. Margaret Kakande. Jimmy has talked about difficult economic times and how women are doing extra work within the household and also outside the household, which brings me to a point within the report where they talked about there's a recommendation to increase financing to infrastructure that will reduce the burden of care work on women. What is the Ministry of Finance, what is the current Ministry of Finance allocation to social development, and how is this money being used to practically solve this problem that has been brought to light?
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Good afternoon, members. All protocol observed. In terms of what can be done to address issues of care work, I think there are a number of programs where we're putting money, not necessarily just focusing on social development. We are basically looking at the two. I can say we are looking at reducing the care work in some aspects, but also redistribution. So if I begin with reducing, the different ways in terms of how you can reduce care work at the household level. One, if you invest in things like water. So if, for example, you can find that right now we have access to water in the rural areas about 74%, and it's more than 90% in the urban areas. And for the last 3 financial years, we've put more than 247 billion in the water sector. So I think thereby actually working on the water, we are working implicitly working on reducing the care work. In the area of social development, which you are actually focusing on yourself, you can look at the issue of empowering women, because if actually you economically empower women, then they can actually help themselves in terms of funding some of those care work activities. We have a big program, which you all know, the Uganda Women's Empowerment Program, and this is in the sector of social development. And this is a program where we've increasingly put money in the last 3 years. And for the last 3 years, if you look at the totals, how much we've spent since financial year 15-16 to 17-18, we did budget for 87 billion, and we were able to release 57.1% billion in that sector. And basically, we've reached out to more than 76,000 women across the country in terms of giving them money to do income-generating activities. So we are doing bits and pieces. But we also have other areas where we've put money, though some of it is not a lot of money, and that can indirectly reduce care work. We are putting money in social protection, SAGE. We have a SAGE program under the, again, Ministry of Gender. And this is an area where we give a little bit of money to people who are 65 years and above, and that can help in terms of care for the elderly. And for the last 3 financial years, we've put in more than 34.5 billion in that area, and we've been able to reach more than 157,000 beneficiaries in 47 districts. Though I must add that out of those 47 districts, 10 of them are actually funded by the development partners. Where I can say that we're not actually doing well, where I think we should do doing better, is in the area of energy. We talked about energy saving stores. We're not doing much there. We've had a program, modern energy from biogas for rural development in the Ministry of Energy. But if you look at the funding, despite the fact that energy sector takes trillions, it's one of the least funded projects. We're not doing well there. And also in terms of early childhood development, I must also admit that we need to do better, because for the last 3 financial years we've just put a minimal 30, I think it's about 38 million in that sector, and we've left most of this work to the private sector. So you really find that early childhood development in Uganda is a private sector activity. So you find that much as I can't say that the government is recognizing explicitly care work, but we have a number of programs, if well implemented, can go a long way in terms of reducing care work in the households.
Thank you very much, Ms. Margaret. I'm going to come to you, Mr. Juma. Education has been highlighted as a key area for reducing unpaid care work for women. I remember when I went to school, which is not a very long time ago, that we were told, there's that homework question, what is the role of a mother? What is the role of a father? Then they will tell you they will tell children to draw a mother mopping the house and a father carrying a briefcase, in a suit, going to a job somewhere. And those are things that influence how society views or looks at care work, because you've seen conversations about how men are shunning it because they are going to be perceived not to be man enough if they are doing these particular roles. How is the Equal Opportunities Commission working to ensure that care work is not only reduced and recognized, but as well redistributed? Because reducing and recognizing does not necessarily translate into redistribution. So how are you doing work within the education sector and other areas where you have key influence to have that, to see that care work is actually recognized, reduced, but above all, redistributed?
Thank you very much. All protocol observed, ladies and gentlemen.
Of course, from the definition of equal opportunities as a process of increasing access and choices of persons, irrespective of their gender, their age, their physical ability, their ethnic background, geographical location, or any attribute by widening the platform for making choices, access productive resources, including skills and participation for realization of their full potential. Of course, that definition is evidence enough of what we do. But of course, what we do flows from the departments that we have. We have a legal services and investigation department, which deals with kind of alternative dispute resolution, social justice mechanisms in one way or the other, irrespective of gender, irrespective of age, irrespective of religion, social cultural background, geographical location, call it. We have the education and communications department, which does a lot of dialoguing, forums or barazas, call it, which does a lot of course, in the different communities. Most recently, we were in PG, engaged the youth on issues pertaining to their, or maybe as regards to their concerns. Then we also certainly do radio, TV talk shows, of course, all aimed at creating awareness. The presenter, Dr. Kasiri, mentioned something about awareness raising. Of course, we do quite a lot in that area. And when we look at this UWONET Oxfam organized program or launch, it falls so much, it fits well within our mandate. This is one of us. Thank you very much, certainly. Then, apart from that, we also have a research department. We conduct thematic research on thematic areas. We do issues dealing with women. We also have a compliance and enforcement department, which does quite a lot, working, of course, together with the Minister of Gender, but more especially with Finance, Minister of Finance, when it comes to the area of assessment, of budget, of policy statements. We are doing quite a lot in that area, of course, to ensure equalization of opportunities. Those assessments, of course, the awards are based on those policy statements as they are structured, of course, maybe the area of the mission, the area of the medium-term plans, plans for ensuring, then, of course, challenges and the like. And then certainly we have to look at gender and equity issues. That is our concern, of course. We look at that area very much. Of course, a huge percentage of our marks go to that area. Look at the children, how have they catered, how are the plans catering for them? Look at the women, look at the men, look at the boys, girls, and the like. So we do quite a lot.
Just one more question before I let you go. I usually see a lot of people petitioning the Equal Opportunities Commission, and because by virtue of your name and your mandate, have you ever had a group of men come to the Equal Opportunities Commission with a petition saying that we want to do more unpaid care work? And do you think it can actually happen?
I would say we are gifted in one way or the other as the Equal Opportunities Commission that we are neighboring, Article 31 of the Constitution, which is to the effect that men and women of age 18 and above have a right to marry and found family, and also entitled to equal rights in marriage, during marriage, and during whatever, when you're dissolving it. That is very good. However, normally what they do, they come in unison. They come as a group, maybe a group of the elderly, with a particular concern, but of course within it, there are elements of what you're trying to.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, sir. Now I'm going to
come to you, Harriet Gimbo. I know that Action Aid has done a lot of work around unpaid care work, but also personally as a women's rights activist, you're passionate about issues of women taking up space in leadership. How does the unfair distribution and failure to recognize unpaid care work affect the other areas of women's rights?
Thank you very much. Protocol observed. I will start by sharing with you why it matters for us to speak about unpaid care work. And I want to emphasize the fact that from the research as well, unpaid care work serves people in our well-being. And in this room, we are beneficiaries of that, to start with. And it is also important for us to understand that it builds families and communities, and it's part of women and men's identity. Coming to how it practically affects women, it's important for us to know the work that women do and the extent, again shown by the statistics here. If you want to feel the pinch of unpaid care work, just leave a man with a child for 2 hours. They will call 110 times for you to return home and look after that child. Just miss a maid for 2 days, because we practically transfer what we should be doing at home to our maids. And practically what we are doing now, one of my colleagues likes calling it telemothering and telefathering. There must be many people here texting back home, how is my baby? How is home? Have you prepared supper? Shopping online? Because we are trying to find alternatives to unpaid care work. You even don't know what's happening to your child now, even if your maid sent to you a photograph of yesterday when your child was smiling. So it becomes complicated when you get to that. The other point is that if you live in a rural area where it's so difficult to find services, is when you will feel a pinch of unpaid care work. It's so difficult to find safe water. You take long distances moving to find a health facility, taking children to a school that is non-existent, but probably a leaking school, and with no teachers, and with no money, and with no facilities. It gets complicated for a mother to move a child to school, leave alone for a father that would attempt to do that. It also undermines the woman's ability as a person in terms of building confidence, in terms of your participation in what is going on in your community. Because you will either be looking after a child, you will be fetching water, looking for firewood, or probably looking after an elderly person in one way or the other. So what have we done as ActionAid? We do conduct what is called time use surveys to understand what does a woman spend her total time on and what does a man spend their time on. It has been mentioned by this research, and I will still emphasize that I think UBOS and Ministry of Finance and Planning must take this to conduct national time use surveys to understand how much time women spend doing unpaid care work. It will help us support the process of recognition of this work. And this also goes to the district departments. It's not just a ministry function. How do you do planning processes that are gender responsive to what women's needs are to support the reduction of this unpaid care work? I do appreciate the investment that government has made, appreciate the policies in place, but we need to see this on the ground. We must move from rhetoric to reality. If we are saying we have a policy on early childhood development, we saw the statistics here around childcare. How is this transformed on the ground to support women with children? It must become practical for us to see that these policies are practically serving the people on the ground. Also, in terms of what we do is to provide technology that is simple to reduce women's burden. Away from the fuel energy saving stoves, we know that women spend a lot of their time doing agriculture. How do we provide technology that is simple, again, that doesn't increase burdens to women? If you brought a very huge tractor that a woman cannot drive, I don't think it's going to help her, because she will have to pay somebody to drive that tractor to do something. So can we have simple technology that women can be able to support to do this kind of thing? The other point that I would emphasize is the implementation of labor laws that is not just a government function, but also a function to all employers. How do we ensure that we have flexible time for women that are working in the organizations? How do we ensure that a woman can move probably with a maid as they are coming to a workplace? We practically do that in ActionAid and pay for it. How do we ensure that we provide breastfeeding time for mothers that have children? That is all a care economy. So many women are worried about employment and sustainability of employment. And we know that many employers don't want to take people that are in the reproductive age because you're worried about maternity leave. But unfortunately, you have no choice because you will have to give that maternity leave to that person, or paternity leave. And probably not so many men take paternity leave when the women give birth. But it is a policy that we think can be able to support women in one way or the other. Finally, in the education sector, we promote girl-child education because these girls must really be in school. But we see that many girls are home to care for children that women cannot be able to care for. So how do we invest in girl-child education and in the services that mothers utilize at home? When we saw what was prominent here was water, issues of health, issues of education, and issues of fuel energy. How do we put that as a priority in our gender responsive budgeting process in the local government, in the central government, to respond to women's needs? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Harriet. And I like the fact that you raise key issues. For example, things like labor laws and whether we can have flexi time, which makes me wonder if in a neoliberal capitalist economy that we run in Uganda, how are business people are willing to make this particular sacrifice? Because, well, everyone wants to make money and it's all about profits. How will the government actually take a stand to make that particular decision and say that as an employer, you have got to do A, B, C, and D, taking into account that these people are here to make their profits and take money back home? Now, I want to bring in Mr. John Bosco from the National Planning Authority. It's almost 2020 and we were promised middle income status. It's a few months away, and we've come to a place where from the presentation you realize that we can't attain middle income status if women are going to spend more time doing work that's not paid for, noting that even we don't have a way to we're currently not computing it into monetary terms or valuing it in terms of monetary terms to add it to the GDP, because then people think that, well, if they're not earning money out of it, then they should not be recognized within the economy. What is the target for NPA in relation to unpaid care work in terms of reducing redistribution and which R have I forgotten? Reduction, redistribution, and recognition. Yes, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. All protocol observed. Actually, I want to begin by trying to allay your fear that unpaid work or care is actually an economic activity, and we are agitating seriously that is an economic activity. From economic perspective, economic wisdom tells me that, or tells us that care work is not illicit, it's a legal activity, takes place in households, so it's what we can clearly classify as household activities in the circular flow of income, and we capture the contribution in terms of what the unpaid workers are doing, though the challenge that oftentimes is not captured in enough accounts because of the difficulty to capture it. But there are mechanisms. We can impute the value of unpaid work by looking at what would have happened, what should have been paid. For example, if you got an alternative of a paid work. So mechanisms are in place to be able to capture it and give a real contribution of unpaid work. The question of middle income status, we agree that the growth strategy for this country is guided by the Uganda Vision 2040 and the National Development Plan, NDP2. And clearly, the NDP philosophy and the Vision 2040 is about inclusive growth. We are rhyming with the SDG tagline, leaving no one behind. And what we have done within the NDP and the Vision 2040, we have clearly identified the strategic or the priority interventions in the social development sector. And there are many. I can just mention a few. We have a policy or a strategy on social protection, trying to reach out to those people who are marginalized in their families. And also the social protection policy recognizes people who need special attention, not necessarily those who are aged above 65. I think what we hope will happen if it's the feel of all of us that unpaid work falls under the special category, then we can be included in the social protection. Specifically regarding the reduction of unpaid work, we agitate for the following policies. One, just a moment. The first policy that we need to ensure, first, regarding recognition, we do realize that there is a need to strengthen the national statistical systems and the national accounts to capture the contribution of unpaid work and domestic work to the country's GDP. Once that is achieved, it will be easier to give a case on how we can compensate for the unpaid work. Two, we need to find a mechanism. We activate a mechanism for accreditation and certification of unpaid work. If we can have a mechanism of certifying this unpaid work into, for example, gardening, housekeeping, and we can be able to standardize that kind of work. It means that we can profile and alternatively find a pay commensurate to that kind of work. In regard to the distribution, we are agitating for training of people across the board, and this training should not be the usual training. Because we know there are hidden costs of accessing training by these kind of the care workers. Women will not be allowed to leave home for a long time to go and work. So we can think of innovative of training, including what we call the mobile training. We get mobile training kits where people can move to where women are and take the training using, for example, the mobile vans. We are also agitating for creation of the job bureaus and improving the labor information management system. What this would help, women will get to know where jobs exist and also be able to work at flex times. Finally, we are encouraging different actors to implement workplace policies which would help women to stay in formal employment, such as mandatory leaves and also getting shelters for breastfeeding mothers. I want to applaud Parliament of Uganda. We know they have a scheme to create a shelter for breastfeeding mothers. There are many other interventions. What we do as a planning authority, our role is to bring together all actors to plan and decide the destiny of this country. We don't implement, but we also support implementation, design of programs by the different implementers, and also we participate in monitoring and evaluation of development outcomes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. John Bosco. I like that you have very detailed ideas of what you as National Planning Authority are doing. Listening to the panelists, there's one thing that I've noted. I fear that the conversation around unpaid care work still is around women. That when we're doing this work, we need to make it easier for women to do this work, but nobody is talking about whether the men want equal opportunities in this particular work, and yet we all, from the report, you said that women want help doing this work, not just to make it easier, because even if there's a nursing place at a workplace, you're still going to go back home to this care work if the person that you're living with is not willing to take on some of these roles, and they'll still be consuming your time. These roles will still be consuming your time. So I'm going to come to the audience. We're going to have 5 minutes to take questions. We're going to have 5 minutes to take questions, and then, okay, fine. Before we get into the plenary session, I'm going to take this opportunity to invite Ms. Rita Achiro from the Executive Director of Uganda Women's Network to invite the Minister to make her remarks.
Can we please give a big round of applause for our panelists? As I said earlier on, these are new grounds, and the new grounds need all of us to be thinking. You can see from the panelists there's a lot of thought that we need to be building on. We've been joined by the State Minister for Gender and Youth, Honorable Nachuala, who is very busy, but because she's so committed to women and youth issues, she said, I'll come.
Tumira omusomesa ali ngene suti ekulumu yagala gye makingira mu bibuuzo. You are dead with my money. Something bigger than a cricket has entered its hall. With Alex Mohanji, the only time in Muchiga. Do not miss his Chibera Chakabi Paita.
On the next episode is brought to you by
Kiri Soda.
Let's celebrate life!
On the next episode,
you had no right to go through my things.
But I did, and it's done.
Fine, so aside from knowing my identity, now you know where you first met me.
Yes, on Garza Blanca. And you knew all along who I was, right? Your one-night stand.
It wasn't like that, Marcella. And you shouldn't have gone through my things.
Nothing in this life is definite. Who knows? Maybe something will happen. I don't know.
Oh, my friend. The only thing that can happen is that the bank will take the rent.
soda in 4 different flavors: lemon, mixed berry, orange, and Kiri Cola. Celebrate life with Kiri Soda.
Let's celebrate life.
This is NTV. This program is rated PG. It is suitable for children ages 8 and above, but parental guidance is advised as it might contain mild violence and mature situations.
Televisa presents ¿Cómo estar sin ti? Si mi alma no puede fingir que te ha cambiado. Si otros